Oh, I think we're live. Guys, that's what happens when you're over caffeinated and yet relaxed at the same time. So welcome, my name is Waylon Lewis. How many of you have done these before? We've done, I think, a couple months of them now since quarantine started. In a couple minutes, we're gonna be joined by one of my favorite humans from afar, Liz Plank, and she is going to talk with us about her book, For the Love of Men, about feminism, about what's the opposite of toxic masculinity, about a mindful masculinity, about how we can kind of all join in actively in a movement to be of benefit to this world, this beautiful, wonderful, crazy, troubled world that we all care about, hopefully. So how can we actually translate that into action? I do want to remind everyone out there to wear a bicycle handkerchief or whatever you like, a mask. Let's care for one another. And let's all begin with a bow, as we like to do from the Buddhist tradition. Just take the best posture you've had all day, maybe all week. Take a great Wonder Woman posture, and then relax it. And find your breath. We won't meditate today, but just find your breath, eyes are open, and with respect and friendliness, let's begin. So we're bowing to everybody everywhere. Speaking of El Paso, it looks like one of our next guests is gonna be a young man by the name of Beto. Some of you know him. We had Senator Cory Booker, Jane Elliott, and I think our next guest is going to be Kate Nelson for Plastic Free July. She's Plastic Free Mermaid. We'll figure out when we can do that. She's in Australia. So does anyone have any questions? Before I invite Liz on, anyone have any questions that you would like me to ask? Put them in Ask a Question. And then Liz and I are gonna have a little talk, and then we're going to move over to Elephant Camp, which is Elephant Academy's weekly live meeting. Does that make sense? It's a quiet group there so far. Is anyone hearing anything? Any replies or thoughts? So any questions for Liz, put them in Ask a Question. Are you there? Can people hear me? So we're gonna move over to Elephant Camp. We're gonna do a writing exercise. I'm gonna ask Liz to lead a writing exercise, which will be something around acknowledging your whole self, even the parts of yourself that you may kind of suppress or internalize and reject, and bring that to offer your whole self to the society to be of benefit. And then she also is an amazing and fun dancer, so we may ask her to help us all wake up a little bit and stop sitting down and do a silly dance or a fun dance. Thank you, everybody. It seems like a quiet group, but have your coffee, turn off your phone or whatever, try to focus, and let's take full advantage of Liz agreeing to be here. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Liz Plank, I assume from New York, but I'm actually not sure. Hello, Liz.
Hi, hey. I'm not in New York, I'm in LA. My son's in New York though, in a storage unit somewhere in Jersey. But I am, yeah, because of the pandemic, I got a little stuck on the wrong coast.
Uh-huh. Okay, so are you living in LA or are you just stuck?
I guess, yeah. So I was here for a project, and then, you know, a lot of things happened, and that project got canceled, and then I couldn't afford both rent, and so I decided to leave my little nook in the East Village. And so yeah, I'm looking for a home. If anyone is interested, I'm pretty fun. All I do is talk about this all day. And yeah, but I'm so excited to join you today. I love that like centering moment. I wish every interview started that way.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we do it for 5 really awkward, very present moments. So speaking of this, you pointed to this. I also have this here. What is this? And you know, every single interview I've watched with you about this book is, okay, as one of the world's leading young feminists, why are you writing a book about men? I want to move a little bit beyond that. and say, how can healing men
Mm-hmm.
help, serve the cause of feminism? And what is feminism to you? How do you view it?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I started writing this book is that I was in a lot of these amazing rooms, these conferences, these panels, these discussion groups, and even, I mean, at the time I was reporting on the 2016 election. There were a lot of issues about sexism coming up to the forefront, obviously, with a presidential candidate who was being accused by several women of sexual abuse, and who was caught on camera bragging about said sexual abuse. And so I started having this moment really of realization where I would be often interviewed as a woman to speak on these issues in a group full of women, right? Often the panel would be all female. And I would be asked to explain sexism. And I would be asked to explain the pain of sexism and sexual abuse, the, proliferation of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, and how common it is for women in our society to experience that, and how unextraordinary it is for a woman to be talked about that way when she's not in the room or when she is in the room. And I would be constantly asked about it to explain why it exists. And I would kind of look around and I'd be like, it would be great. Like maybe ask a guy, maybe ask the people who are, by far the perpetrator and the majority of perpetrators when it comes to these, really unfortunate social issues that we have. And as I started writing the book, I started talking to men. I'd already, I would always try and strike up a conversation about gender equality with men and feminism, and particularly with the men in my life. But once I started talking to, literal strangers, and I did this social experiment in the park with the amazing Esther Perel, and I had a sign that said "Free advice for man from a woman," and I just wanted to see what kind of advice men needed. And turns out they have a lot of questions, and they don't often feel like they can ask questions, period, right? So if a man can't ask for directions or can't ask for questions to the nearest gas station, how is he supposed to figure out how to be a man, right? How is he supposed to figure out the bigger things in life? And
that's the real thing. We don't feel comfortable. We're all boxed. And you refer to Billy Bush. Like, so many of us are in that Billy Bush situation where we're not benefiting from toxic patriarchy or whatever it's called. Mm-hmm. Only a few are benefiting from that patriarchy, like the Trumps of the world. But a lot of us laugh along when we hear that inappropriate.
Yeah. And when I heard that tape is when I knew, because I, obviously what Donald Trump was saying was so outrageous, but the reaction that Billy Bush was having, to me, I don't know about you, but I could just sense the inauthenticity of that. I could sense, like, this is a guy, like a person who's uncomfortable and needs to, because I've been in that position too, right? Like, you just want to kind of get out of there. And there's a person in power who you cannot, you're afraid to threaten or disagree with or not please. And so you just kind of like laugh along, or or whatever that behavior kind of looks like. And I remember hearing him laugh and I was like, that's not real laughter. That's not like him really enjoying this. Right. But he's still complicit, right? And feels like he needs to do that and laugh about sexual assault, which is, shows you, I think, and you know this because you're a man, how really insidious this is, and how this male code really, just goes so far and is you have to be like a soldier in it. And if you kind of take a stance and you want to do something different, it can be really damaging or difficult.
Talk about locker room talk. Like, we have men, and I think many women have all heard inappropriate talk. I would say what Trump said was beyond inappropriate. It was violent. It was, but I had a boss who often would refer to women as bitches, and I had been brought up by a single mom, and obviously that was not part of my vocabulary, and I'm thankful every day for her and for that. But when I heard it, did I interrupt him? Did I say, don't call women bitches? No. So there is some level of like that Billy Bush in a lot of us where we're like, I don't really agree with this, but I don't have enough motivation or something to interrupt them and say this is inappropriate. So how can we raise the bar, men and to a lesser extent women, to say all this kind of conversation or behavior is not appropriate? We might have frozen a little bit there. I think Liz will come back in a sec, but I think for myself, it just really is that moment, like Black Lives Matter, where we have to say, hearing any kind of derogatory, casual conversation, it just can't fly. I don't think any of us would put up, with, hopefully, with that kind of racist conversation, but that sexist, that, you know, sexism light, where it's not talking about grabbing someone's pussy, but it's, you know, bitch. And yeah, I think it's wonderful to reclaim it. Hopefully, like that article Lindsay just shared, for all of us, reclaim these words that are used against women. But when we hear them used in the conventional way, we need to raise that bar and say, maybe don't call women bitches. Liz, I was just filling space answering.
I love it. Such a pro.
Oh, you heard it? I just answered for myself what I hope could happen. But what were you saying?
Well, it's funny because we, think alike, because I was also going to go, I mean, I've just been thinking recently with so much of the resurgence of a conversation around racism, a real, you know, public commitment from, you know, not just political leaders, but even corporations and other kinds of leaders in our society really taking a stand against racism. And I find it so inspiring because it is the first time, I think, and maybe in my short, you know, haven't been alive that long, and I also have not even lived in the United States for that long, but it is really fascinating to see people come into the racism, seeing white people come into the racism conversation in a different way. And to me, the difference is that, you know, we are actually responding to the questions that Toni Morrison, that James Baldwin, that, you know, Malcolm X have been asking for years, which is, what's wrong with you? Right? Like when white people come into a conversation around racism and they ask the Black person on the panel, how do we solve racism? The answer to that question is, you tell me. Yeah. What is wrong with you that you diminish people of color in private and public spaces? What is wrong with you that when someone says the N-word, or when someone, whatever shape or form racism takes in that space, that you don't feel like you can say anything about it, or that you don't have the motivation, right, to take a stance? What is wrong with you that you have not, you know, hired a single Black person, and that you have not even thought about how that's inappropriate, or how that's, you know, discrimination, really. So I think that there's a really interesting shift that's happening, where the responsibility is finally being put on white people to figure this out, and that we are seeing the way that, just like the coronavirus, racism is also a health epidemic, right? And is also a virus, and that white people are kind of finally embarrassed a little bit about it. And there's the shift that, you know, Ibram Kendi has, you know, talked about, and again, it's sort of, and this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I highly recommend everyone goes and buys if you have the means, and if you don't, there's a lot of really good podcast interviews that he's done. He's been on Ezra Klein's podcast, and it's you know, you get a really full understanding of his philosophy. But basically, it's that we don't need and want white people to come into a conversation around racism trying to prove that they're not racist. And similarly, I, as a woman, do not want men to come into a conversation about sexism proving to me that they're not sexist. Right. But that is often what happens. What I need you to do is to tell me, and which I try and do with the book, which is like, I have been born into a sexist society. As a man, by virtue of that, I have engaged or been complicit or, you know, actively participated in the oppression of women and you know, sometimes also oppression of white people, right? There's a white supremacist, heterosexist patriarchy, right? But this is how I'm going to stop doing it. And also, which is the big point in my book, is like, it's hurting you, right? Like this patriarchy and this level of gender inequality and gender stereotyping and, you know, sometimes state-sponsored gender roles that we have are hurting women, no doubt. They are also hurting men, and you are hurting yourself, right? And this again comes back to Toni Morrison, you know, saying that if you to feel like a good person or to feel like a person, you need to hold your, you know, your foot on someone's neck. You need to hold someone down to feel something. What is that about? And oh my gosh, go figure that out and leave me out of it, right? And she says, leave me out of it. And I have goosebumps thinking about that, because that is why I wrote this book. A lot of people were saying, why is it women's jobs again? Why aren't you right? I'm like, I'm doing this because I don't want to deal with it anymore. I want men to go figure it out for me and for themselves.
And we are, I mean, you talk a lot about raising boys and girls. We are big sweeties, men, when we're boys and maybe when we're men, but that's not encouraged. There's a lot of kind of gendered parenting or culturally, I might have lost you again. Can you hear me? So there's a lot of discouraging when a boy cries or let alone a man cries. I think you have a shirt that I love that says, "Let boys cry." And a lot of great male leaders have also been big criers. And I think we've seen that throughout history. It's just part of who we are as men. We can be tender and we can be vulnerable and we can cry, and that can be beautiful. And then we don't have to, you know more about this, but kind of take out our weird, unacknowledged emotions on women, on minorities, on the planet. Does that make sense? So how can we encourage, like the other day I was with my girlfriend, we were playing basketball with these 3 kids in a park, and it was 2 like strong girls. Like one was a gymnast and the other was doing these hard yoga postures, if I remember. And then there was this little boy, their little brother was this little boy, and he tried to kind of show off and do this really cool mountain bike move, skidding, and he wiped out and he started crying. And you know, I used to help run summer camps. I immediately was like, you know, my whole goal was to make him feel okay about crying, and that it does hurt, and that's totally okay, and he doesn't have to pretend that he's tough and not, you know, because you could see that conflict immediately in him, that he was surprised and kind of violated by the cement very suddenly and crying. And you just, you know, it's totally okay. As a big man, I wanted to make him know that I thought that was totally okay and not embarrassing. Like, it's not embarrassing to wipe out on your bike in front of your 2 sisters and some strangers. It's great. But so how can we encourage that with boys? And how can we encourage feminism with girls? I'm sorry about the clumsy question, but hopefully you get what I mean.
No, it's a really excellent question. And my answer is, like, you know, we need to raise boys and girls the same way, right? We need to raise children. You know, if you think about the theory of conscious parenting, you know, the idea that we, I don't know, there's this traditional view on parenting that you raise your children in your image, right? Or that you raise your children to be who you want them to be. And I think that's, you know, sort of the mainstream, you know, traditional perspective on parenting. And there's
I was okay at football in high school. I want you to be great at football.
Yes.
Like, I want you to fulfill my dreams, kind of. Exactly.
And I think that's unfortunately, a prevailing view, that like, you are my, you know, my little me, like, and obviously that puts tremendous pressure on children to fulfill their parents' unfulfilled dreams, which is, you know, no big deal. And so obviously that's, you know, can cause a lot of harm. But there's this theory called conscious parenting, which is, you know, you are there as a parent to fulfill your children's, to sort of make sure that your child fulfills their own dreams, that your child becomes who they are meant to be and who they want to be in the world, right? And so that is so much more of an empowering, I think, view on parenting. It's also such a, as a person who struggles with like, should I have children or not? It also takes a lot of pressure off, because I think that there is this idea of, I need to, there's all this pressure for this person to be, I have to be perfect in order to raise up, perfect child, and like, just like not true, right? Let's slow down there.
How is that not true? Because I think about that too. Like, I have some negative habitual patterns. I'm 45 now. I'm like always like, I need to kind of work with these patterns out before I have kids, because I don't want to see them eating 5 million miles per hour like I do.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think about that too all the time, and I've been trying to stop doing that, because and when I talk to my parents, I realize they had not figured it all out before they had me, and I'm glad that I'm here and they are too. And I think that we don't think about the way that our children are there to also help us, right? That there's like, it's not this top-down relationship if you're lucky. It is, right? It is I give to you, you give to me, and we are, not just egalitarian, but giving and sharing with each other. And I think that as a child, because that's the only perspective I have, I feel like I did inherit some of my parents' stuff, but I also, I inherited their best qualities, and we have learned a lot from each other. And I think I've helped them, work through some of the things that they struggle with, and obviously vice versa. And I think that's really beautiful, right? You don't have to be perfect and all figured out so that you can then be also this perfect person. Like, is that the goal? Is that what, is that a good model anyways, for someone who, right? Like, life is about not being perfect, right? And life is about dealing and being able to deal with pain. And that's just the best gift that you can give your child is to go through that authentically and give them permission to do that too, which comes back to crying, right? It comes back to, letting your boy or girl or gender binary, however they identify, feel what they're feeling, and being able to manage manage your emotional, spiritual self is just the most important quality just across the board in the society that we live in. It's called EQ. It's called emotional intelligence. Of course, IQ is extremely important. We have a whole curriculum in school that is designed to make sure that we hit all of these different markers. But where's the class on attachment style? Right? Where's the class on, kindness, on generosity, on ego, and sort of dealing with the inner turmoil of being a human being in the world? And if we don't give all children access to those tools, we're really we're doing a disservice to our entire society.
So I got to grow up kind of in that class. I went to these Buddhist schools, and we practiced meditation and all this. And that EQ is so essential. And it doesn't make me or anyone who went to those schools any better or perfect, but we got to understand, I'm stressed out. That's why I'm yelling at my friend or something. And so we call our website slogan for, since we started back in the 2008, back in the day, and we were a print magazine in 2002, we say the mindful life. And your subtitle here is mindful masculinity. So why, this is a kind of a softball question, but it's such a sexy subject to me. Why did you decide to focus on mindful masculinity, not, we have 8,000 articles on Elephant about toxic masculinity?
And I read many of those articles, by the way. I'm such a big fan, and have been such a big fan. For a really long time. I think it was literally 2008 or 2010 when I was doing my master's, and I remember just really leaning on your kind of journalism and storytelling, and I think it's so important. So I've been totally inspired by it, and the reason why I did not. So I'm a solution-based person. I practice solution-based journalism because, and I actually learned that later that it had a name. But it's very important to me that I tell stories and that I write words and that I say things that activate you rather than depress you, right? I want to activate you and engage you. And hopefully I'm not depressing you. Maybe I am. I don't really have control over how you feel, but I try in the way that I talk about everything that I care about in a way that will make you feel empowered to change it. And not make you, you're already empowered to change it. Actually, I'm not making you feel anything, and I'm not, I'm not empowering you. You are empowered to make a difference in the world, and I'm here to remind you of that. Exactly. And so this was why it was really important for me to have a positive solution-based framework for the book. So instead of putting For the Love of Men, how to combat toxic masculinity, or even putting toxic masculinity in the title, which would have sold far more books, by the way, because people, this is confusing. It's like, wait, is this a book that's, I'm used to just seeing books that why men are bad. And this is like a book that men are good, but then there's all this data that's kind of telling me that I'm doing bad things. It's like, whoa. So I understand that it's a little, and that's why I also came up with a positive term, which is mindful masculinity. And I thought about this for so long because there was no term. Right. There's like no term. There's toxic masculinity. We only have the problem defined. We don't have the solution defined, which really tells you a lot about why we're still here. Right.
There is gentleman, which is a very old word, but it's kind of a nice word, gentleman. And that's held up as someone who's dignified, and someone who's a contributing member of society. That's kind of nice. Yeah,
I love that. But I also think that is also associated maybe with, old school chivalry, or like, be a gentleman, but I think we should define it, right? Or update it to what does it mean to be a gentleman today? And I'm actually curious what you think.
I have to ask you, I know you've been asked in so many interviews. I've just like binge watched so many of your videos, but I love the Chivalry Diet. I love it.
Yeah.
And maybe that should be the title of the next book. Many, many years ago, I wrote something way less sexy that was titled like "To Go Dutch or Not to Go Dutch," or "To Go Dutch, Going Dutch on the First Date." Maybe that was the title. And I'm a big fan. I don't know why. I really don't love paying for everything when I'm dating. I find it weird and unempowering for the woman, and kind of everything you talked about. So can you tell us about the Chivalry Diet, and how does that benefit both sexes? Or, I don't want to be totally gendered about everything, but how can that benefit both partners?
Yeah, totally. So I went on a Chivalry Diet for this book. It was difficult. I paid for my own French fries, which was a new thing for me. No, I mean, look, I've been in several different relationships. Where there's a dynamic that mostly is like imposed by how well someone's doing financially, and that can change right in a relationship. And so I dated people who were doing far better than me, and I was like a student, and I didn't have money, and so okay, I'll get the French fries. And in other situations where that there was I'd experienced a lot of different versions of it, but I started realizing that while I was writing the book, I was telling men to stop doing all this stuff. But I also realized that I was kind of expecting it. And not again, we talked about this in the green room, but together about how we internalize these things, right? So it's not just that society is telling you, this is what you got to do. You got to be the man. You can't cry. You got to pay for the meal. You got to dominate or whatever, right? It's that becomes your script. And you have seen that so often. And every character and every story on television or in movies or in conversation has been that. And so that's what you think you are. And that's what you think you should expect. And when that doesn't happen, you feel uncomfortable. But it comes back to, what am I feeling uncomfortable about? right? Am I feeling uncomfortable because he should pay and I should be, expecting this, and it means he doesn't respect me, or it means he doesn't value my time, or it means I'm not special to him? Isn't that crazy? Like, isn't that wild that we've internalized that idea? Or is it just that, this is different from what is expected, or this is different from what I've been taught, or what I've learned. And let me think about why I expect that, or let me think about what that does, right? Which is the part for me when I went on the diet, is that I realized the purpose of chivalry in my relationships was control. And in participating
say that twice. That is so powerful.
The purpose of chivalry is control.
Ooh.
But I didn't know until I did it. Until you stop participating in a social contract is when you realize the how rewarded you are if you do, and how punished you are if you don't. And what I started to see was a unraveling of my relationship based on the fact that I started going Dutch on everything. And I think I talk about in the book where we had rented this, or my boyfriend at the time had rented this place and upstate or whatever, and I just Venmo'd him like half of the price. I'd ask him, like, oh, how much was it? And he just told me, and then I like Venmo'd him, and then he didn't mention it. He didn't bring it up. And then like a day in, he kind of said, it was like, I noticed that you paid for my, I appreciate it, but like, and he clearly was like uncomfortable. But I started changing in that weekend, right? Because I was like, oh, I'm paying to be here too. This is my space as well. And I started not accepting the same things, and he started not imposing that, right? It just totally changed the dynamic. And that's when I realized how, like, my freedom is wrapped into this. And
the word there is, it can feel emasculating, which is such a awful thing to realize, that your masculinity, that your strength, that your dynamic is dependent on control.
Yes. Isn't that, and it, again, it comes back to, who are you, right? How do you define yourself as a man when you can't do that, right? When you can't use, money, right, to enforce a certain dynamic that makes you feel comfortable. And wouldn't it be so liberating for you to figure out who you are without depending on external, right, control mechanisms or coping mechanisms or someone else's reaction to that ritual? Wouldn't it be liberating for you to figure out who you actually are, and to have that internally dictated, not externally through your relationship with a woman acting a certain way? And that's what I really want for men and women, frankly. But specifically, it's an internal. A lot of this is political, and I'm a political reporter. But the word mindful, I really chose mindfully because it's a mindfulness exercise. It's an internal exercise.
I love that. Yeah, there's a comment saying, it's nice to let someone pay for you. And for sure, in my relationships, I'm sure in yours, then when you pay for someone, it's because you're feeling romantic, or you want to do something special. It's actually special. It's not expected. And like, even when we went and got ice cream yesterday, or whatever, is every single day the person taking the money will say, "Are you two together?" And that question is so weird to me. I'm like, well, we're hanging out together, but no, we'll pay separately. And it doesn't mean that we don't like each other. There's this weird, awkward moment every single time, especially as the guy, to say, no, I'll just get mine. It feels like you're kind of letting society down in that moment. But it's
how does it feel? I'm curious. How does it feel? Yeah, when in that moment, and maybe it's a male or a female waiter that comes up, and then you say, no, like we're splitting. What is that discomfort?
Well, number one, I'm very comfortable doing it because of my values and how I see the dynamic change. And like you said, my girlfriend or the boyfriend or whoever it is, no one should have to feel like a guest in someone's space all the time.
That's so
but,
great.
but I do feel like there's this weird, it's always a little bit of a gray moment. Like the moment's light and colorful, like American in Paris, and then it's a gray moment where you're kind of letting down the waiter or the waitress, you're letting down the restaurant, you feel like you're letting society down a little bit by saying, no, I'll just get mine. She'll just get her, whatever it is. And it's okay. You need to be willing to have that. Like I wrote a book about relationships, and it's all about, you have to be willing to have that awkward conversation. And it's not that bad,
Yeah. And it's only, so I, date women and men and I come back to this a lot in the book of just how much straight people can learn from queer people. So there's all this data about how much happier gay couples are because they share domestic chores based on preference instead of expectation, right? It's the same thing, right? If a guy, if a woman wants to put out the garbage and likes fixing the sink, I don't know, and the guy actually really enjoys cooking and enjoys taking care of the kids, that's a conversation. And that's something you need to explain, right? A stay-at-home dad has to constantly explain why he is taking care of the children, while when a woman does it, it's expected and it's normal. And so when you ask and I did this for Snapchat or whatever, I don't remember what Vox show we were doing at the time, but I asked all kinds of couples on the street, like, how do you decide who pays for the bill? And I think that the original framing was, should guys pay on the first date? And it's New York City, so you get all kinds of different couples. And the most interesting responses were from, gay couples, whether it was women or men. And they just were like, oh, like whoever asked the person out on the date. And I was like, that feels way more normal, right? Like, and it's not based on a pre-existing power dynamic, right? Of you're the man, therefore you are, I don't know what, right? Like the dominating one, or you must seek me and you must chase me. And if I am paying for you and I am inviting you, it means somehow, because it's a thing for women too, right? If he doesn't pay for me, or he didn't ask me out and I have to ask him out, or I have to, it's like, there's something wrong with me. Right? Like I'm doing the reverse. And again, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that you feel bad and I feel bad if we don't, participate in these pre-existing, sort of musical chairs. And so we can learn so much from queer couples in the way that they make decisions based on the relationship rather than based on these imaginary, rules that are rooted in just, centuries of, screwed up oppression.
Yeah, the lady I'm dating and we do chores based on height convenience. Because there's about a foot between us. So if it's up there, I'll probably do it. And if it's down here.
That makes way more sense. That makes so much more sense. Yeah. That makes sense.
So let me ask a related question, because I think if I were an empowered woman, I would, in that dating relationship, I would be like, well, I like him paying for me, if only because pay is so unequal, at least I can claw some back, So if you're not clawing some back by getting the patriarchy to at least pay for some stuff, then you are forced to confront the actual root problem, which is unequal pay. So how do we make pay more equal? Because it is, I know there's debate between conservatives and liberals about this. The numbers don't mean this and that and blah, blah, blah. But unequal pay is a real thing, right? And it's a problem. How do we fix that?
Well, so unequal pay, whenever conservatives, again, not all of them, and, hashtag not all conservatives, but when, many conservatives will come into a conversation about equal pay, just using numbers again to, and often, by the way, if you're a woman having this conversation, you will be told that you don't understand math, that you don't understand numbers, that you don't understand how the economy works, because that is a trope. And a woman like AOC, who has a literal degree in economics and is, obviously incredibly gifted when it comes to understanding these things, is still being told by, people in Congress and people on the internet that she just doesn't understand math, when she has a real good understanding of it, because she sees a society where where if you are a woman, if you are a person of color, you just make less money. You just have less wealth. And unless you think that men deserve more wealth or are somehow better as a species, as a gender, and that white people are just better at their jobs and they add more value to society, unless you believe that, then you need to be fighting for equal pay. You need to be involved in the conversation about a redistribution of wealth. All of us, exactly. It's not just a gender issue, it's a race issue. It's as we've been talking with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and that conversation, wealth inequality in America is a joke. It is just completely, rooted in just years and years and years of policies and oppression that make it impossible for people of color to actually actively get wealth. And we know, by the way, that for the difference between Black boys and white boys in America is just you're living in a different country. So if you are a Black boy in America and you are raised by legit millionaires, millionaire, you are just as likely to end up incarcerated as a white boy raised under the poverty line at $36,000 or just right above the poverty line. It's just so that's not even just, that's one of the results, right, of pay inequality and wealth inequality, that no matter how much money you make, even when you make that much money, you are still not exempt from the racism and the systemic structural racism in our society and the mass incarceration,
Yeah, we hosted Cory Booker here the other day, and I think you've interviewed him many times. He's amazing. And he wrote that article that you may remember in Stanford when he was a star athlete. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He wrote this article talking about how he had been pulled over and, police officers shining light bulbs in his face and drawn guns and not shining light bulbs. And then he also talked about, even as a senator, when he took off his suit and stuff at the end of the day to go jog back to his apartment in DC, during the protest particularly, he didn't even feel safe. So there's this level of, to that point about the Black millionaire boy, you never are allowed, we as a racist society, a systemically racist society, we never allow our Black brothers and sisters to feel safe.
Yep. Oprah, right? We all remember Oprah was, stopped at a Louis Vuitton store in Italy or whatever, right? When she they thought she was, stealing, and that's Oprah Winfrey, just one of the richest people in the world, right? Or Serena Williams, who has a baby and experiences almost died in childbirth because we don't believe the pain of Black women as much as we believe the pain of white people and white women. And so, there is no level of wealth that actually protects you from systemic racism. And so, yes, we must correct these inequalities. We must address the fact that 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women, and that you cannot live on minimum wage in America. That is just, we have not changed the minimum wage in 3 decades. And that is a direct tax on women. And that's a direct tax on their children and their families and the people that they care about. And so we really need to ask ourselves how and which jobs matter, right? We are every day at 7 or 8, depending on where you live, you go and you clap for the essential workers. You know what they want? More than clapping and, Instagram posts. Great, continue doing that, but really valuing people and, means giving them, paid leave, means giving them sick leave, means giving them a salary that which can actually feed their families. And, my friend Molly Burkham talks about this all the time. These people aren't heroes. They're humans, right? We turn women into heroes. We turn single moms into heroes. We turn Black women particularly into heroes, right? But Black women, will tell you we're not superhuman. We're people, and we are deserving of of living and living in safety and not struggling to feed ourselves and feed our children. And so, when we talk about social justice, it's economic justice at its root. I mean, it has to be.
Well, we have to do this again. We're kind of out of time for the first part.
Okay.
I could honestly listen and learn with you and from you for another 2 hours at least, 2 weeks. But please, everyone, support this wonderful book that doesn't have a cheap, tacky title, that actually means what it says, has tons of research in it. It's not just opinions. And for the love of men, and don't buy it on Amazon. Buy it at a Black-owned bookstore or an independent bookshop.
Yes.
Please, let's put that link in there again. And we will continue with Liz over in our academy, our online school. So if you're doing any academy course, it's free. A lot of them are super cheap. Elephant Academy, elephantjournal.com/academy. And Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you, Waylon. So fun.
And I said something that could sound patronizing in the beginning, that you're so fun. I want to fill that out a little bit and say your humor, your dancing, your style, you use everything that you love and delight in to make feminism something that we can sink our teeth into, that we can learn from, instead of just another sign that we can support or yell at. We actually can learn about it. So I really appreciate that you bring your whole self to this subject, and that's what we're going to do the writing exercise about.
I'm so thrilled. Thank you. And thank you for your leadership on all of these things. It's incredible. And I as a woman, I appreciate it so much that you are a man doing this work too.
Well, it's all my mom, and it's service, not leadership. But thank you so much. And Liz, big respect, and get that book. Please read it. And if you want, Liz is really good about it. If you share yourself reading a book, particularly men reading this book and learning about it, share it up on social media, on Instagram or whatever.
Yes, please. Book selfies for authors are just so great. It makes us so happy to see someone enjoy and see your face enjoying it. Yes, thank you for saying that. We appreciate it so much.
Awesome. All right, let's all take a good Wonder Woman posture and end with a bow. And we'll see Liz again in a few minutes. Oh yeah,
Great.
That's the proper. What is it?
Is it? Yeah. This is it? No, this is it. Oh yeah.
I don't know it. Oh yeah, she has the guards there.
Yes.
All right, that's my first Wonder Woman bow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
All right, we'll see all of you again in a few minutes. Go to elephantjournal.com/academy. Check your email. And we're going to start in just a couple minutes. So if you already have the code in your email, look for an email from Elephant Academy. You have a couple minutes, go get a water, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do. But we're going to start, because I went a little late because it's so hard. Liz is so amazing. I couldn't stop. We're going to start in just a minute or two. So if you want to join, elephantjournal.com/academy. If you enjoyed today and you're not going to join the camp, that's great. We do this every Friday. I think we have Kate Nelson, Plastic Free Mermaid, coming up with some practical advice about how to go plastic free as a whole planet, which again, I think connects with feminism, treating Mother Earth right, stop exploiting and abusing the planet and one another. Environmental issues often affect minorities and women first and most. And then it looks like we might get Beto O'Rourke on the next week. So please keep going. Click some of those links. Hope you read them and enjoy them later on. There's the link. Check your email. And if you're lost, if you're dazed, if you're confused, you can email academy@elephantjournal.com, and we will help you out directly in terms of getting into camp, which is now going to begin basically now.